So as you can see, age, sex, race, and socio-economic statuses are still our fundamental causes. Aside from socio-economic statuses, fundamental causes are also our age, the year we are born with, things we don't really have control over. We don't choose to be born. It's common sense. I'm sure you know. Our sex, not gender, sex. We are born with a certain sex. We can change it now with technology, reassignment surgery, not in those days. So, we don't really have control over our original sex. And race, we don't get to change our race, right? And our sex determines the hormones we are going to get, not gender, sex. Sex is biology, right? Whether we have estrogen or testosterone, or X and Y hormones, right? And our socio-economic status, income, occupation, education, determines our health knowledge and health behaviors. With all this health knowledge, it determines whether we drink excessively, smoke in moderation, do drugs, or we abstain from all these things. And oftentimes, different fundamental causes, they interact with one another. A person from a given sex so happen to be a single mom from a given race, live in certain neighborhoods because of her income. That's where she can afford to live. And the neighborhood can be stressful. It's going to affect whether she's going to engage in any level of drinking or drug behaviors or not. As you can see, this remains the fundamental causes, and our fundamental causes determines the job we are going to get. Some jobs are more dangerous or hazardous than others. It's a no-brainer, right? When we are too old, we cannot take jobs that involve too many physical requirements. We become weak. And the nature of our job depends on our sex. Men are more likely to be movers, right? Because they have more strength. And our occupation to some degree is determined by our race or our education, occupation, and income. And there's also age differences, sex differences, race differences, differences by socio-economic status in the risk for cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Can you see? Fundamental cause is always there. Now the diagram changed recently, but fundamental cause will always be there for sociologists. And our risk for cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, diabetes affects our plasma ACE2 concentration. What is ACE2? It's angiotensin converting enzyme. You don't need to know for your test. It's an enzyme that serves as protein on cell surfaces. And according to researchers, it's an entry point for COVID. Questions so far? And our ACE2 interacts with the spike protein in SARS to affect our plasma ACE2 concentration. And our plasma ACE2 concentration, according to researchers, they confirm that they vary by age, by sex, by race, and by different socio-economic statuses. Can you see? The fundamental causes are always there. all these are intermediary mechanisms or risk factor. They change over time, right? It looked very different from the diagram in 19th century, right? And our risk for pneumonia respiratory illness like ADRS, which can sometimes be fatal, is determined by our sex hormones, whether we have testosterone or estrogen, is also affected by our health behavior in terms of drinking, smoking, and our pneumonia or our risk for pneumonia respiratory illness is also affected by how hazardous our jobs are going to be. Our risk for pneumonia respiratory illnesses also depends on our regulatory genes in our system, which affects our immune system response. And our risk for pneumonia respiratory illnesses also depends on how our antibodies function after COVID recovery. So, can you see? Fundamental cause is always here, according to sociologists. And the risk factors have changed. Can you see that? For COVID, it's a different risk factor. Can you see that? It's very different from the one you saw for 19th century, right? Any question? Am I confusing? Any question? Okay. And nobody have a holistic knowledge about COVID, right? It seems that the etiologies of COVID, they are still changing to this day. Nobody really knows where it came from, to be politically correct, right? Even though it's a legit medical condition. But people are still researching about the etiologies, right? And we don't think COVID is a contested illness. I don't think so. Unless I'm wrong about something. Who knows? Maybe you know something I don't. Something beyond sociology. I don't think COVID is a contested illness. Any thoughts? Anybody know something that I don't? Maybe you can share. I don't buy. And researchers have found that athletes, this research is not holistic either. It's based on certain samples, but they have confirmed to some degree that athletes, people who play sports, people who exercise, they have lower risk for COVID for some reason. These are the reasons. And this can also be explained by the fundamental cause theory. It has something to do with our glutathione reserve. I don't know if I say that right. Age determines the level of this reserve. Our glutathione reserve decrease after age 30. It even further decrease after age 65, old age. This partly explains why old people have higher risk of COVID, right? It has something to do with this glutathione reserve. And this reserve has something to do with how much we weigh. And this reserve is lower for those who are heavier, who are obese or overweight. And because of that, it seems that obesity is tied to COVID, right? It has something to do with this glutathione reserve. And when you exercise, whether you are athletes or not, it increases the secretion of this glutathione reserve. Is protective against COVID, according to some researchers. And this glutathione reserve is related to our level of vitamin D, according to researchers. If this reserve is high, vitamin D is also high. Because of that, when you exercise, some researchers found that you are protected from COVID to some degree when you are active. Do you buy that? Ladies and gentlemen, students, any question? This is my understanding of fundamental cause theory, using COVID as example, as a sociologist. You may know something that I don't, but you are quiet. Any question?